think we can go ahead and begin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth Levy. I'm Interim Director of the UC Davis Humanities Institute, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome to our ongoing series of conversations in the humanities. Welcome to everyone. Today, we take a reflexive turn to think about the history and future of the UC system at what many, if not all of us, feel is a crucial time in the history of the public university in general and of the University of California in particular. Our guest is Professor of Spanish and Education, Cristina Gonzalez, and we're delighted to have her here. As I was gathering up biographical information on Professor Gonzalez, I noticed that she teaches a freshman seminar called Introduction to the University of California. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what we need, or rather a reintroduction to some of the key documents, people, issues that have shaped the university in recent decades. Questions of access, privatization, administrative oversight, faculty governance, and so forth. I'm sure you'll agree that Cristina is in an excellent position to share her insights on these questions. Since arriving to UC Davis in 1997, she has served as Dean of Graduate Studies, and from 2002 to 2004 as Senior Advisor to the Chancellor, while also teaching and publishing on higher education, Hispanic literature, and the history of Latinos in the United States. She's served the university community in a wide range of capacities, thinking about support for graduate students, work-life balance, and inclusiveness among all campus constituencies, always with an eye to making the university a better place to work and a better place to learn. Professor Gonzalez's most recent book, Clark Kerr's University of California, published in 2011, lays the groundwork for this talk by engaging directly with the different philosophies of leadership that, on the one hand, gave rise to the California Master Plan for higher education, and on the other hand, have threatened some of the key tenets of that plan in recent years. The title of Cristina's talk this afternoon raises the question, universities cannot escape history, but can they make it? I'd also like to call your attention to the subtitle of her recent book, Leadership, Diversity, and Planning in Higher Education. It's hard to think of three things that we need more urgently in this time and place. So please join me in welcoming Cristina Gonzalez. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for that kind introduction and for inviting me to speak. It's always nice to talk on your home campus. You are going to see that I have these glasses. I'm recovering from eye surgery, so I haven't gotten my new glasses yet. So I can see you more or less, but I cannot read. And I got these glasses at the pharmacy. Okay, so yes, this presentation is about my book, and it's actually a repeat of a presentation I gave at Berkeley in October. Here the Institute learned about that presentation, and they asked me to come and give it here again. I think many things have happened on the Davis campus since October, and so even though the presentation is the same, the context is not the same, so it might be read a little differently, but I think if anything it will make my comments more relevant, because I think some of the things I say and some of the things the students say are actually similar. My approach is intellectual, this is a book, research, etc. And theirs is more emotional, but there's some echoes there, I think. So my book is about many things. But one of the things that I discuss is how the University of California became a world-class university. And I want to tell you that I actually was in China in June, teaching a graduate seminar about higher education, and they asked me to give a presentation about how to create world-class universities. You know, in China they are very interested in improving their institutions of higher learning. So I talk about my book, and basically what I told them there is that all the stars were aligned, that all the things that one needs to have a world-class university were in place. And these were a rich and supportive state, money and the desire to spend that money. Also a beautiful location, which I think actually is quite important because you can attract people and you can keep them here. Very good faculty, very good students, very, very good administrators, and I attach a lot of importance to this, that the University of California has had extraordinary leadership at key moments of its development. So that was an important factor, and my book is a lot about that. And then, of course, a state that was very democratic, that had a vision of itself, in which the University of California had a very important role. So all these things put together resulted in the creation of this wonderful institution. Now, the irony of my comments in China, where everybody was paying so much attention and listening to this with such intensity and trying to figure out what they could use for their own universities, is of course that they are trying to improve the universities, that they look at us as this wonderful model, while, as you know, we are having a lot of difficulties here, and we are in crisis actually. So I think we need to talk and think about the future and how we can move forward and not lose this wonderful institution. So this is what my book is about. You have a handout, and basically that has just, it's basically a table of contents of my book. So you'll see different parts and chapters and so forth. I'm not going to give a synopsis of the entire book here today. I will focus on part 3, which is about the history of the University of California, and even that is going to be very abbreviated. But before I even talk about the history, I think I should say a few things about an animal metaphor that I use throughout the book. I use it in many different ways, and it is a very old metaphor that comes all the way from the Greeks, who said something a little bit mysterious. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And this has been used by different people over time with different purposes. One of the people who used this metaphor was Clark Kerr. Clark Kerr, in the last chapter of the last edition of his most famous book, The Uses of the University, used this metaphor to establish a distinction between two different kinds of academic leaders. The hedgehogs, who know one big thing, and that is the vision. They have a vision, and they relate everything to that central vision. And the foxes, who know many things, who are shrewd, who know how to maneuver, who are practical. And what he said was that, first of all, he was basically the last of the hedgehogs. He was a hedgehog, clearly. And he thought that the kind of leader that he was had gone out of style. And that today universities were facing such complex conditions that they needed foxes at the top. And so he basically, in that chapter, he concedes to the foxes. And the end of the chapter I find most depressing. He basically says, hedgehogs, rest in peace. Foxes, good luck in your adventures in the 21st century. And that's the end of the book. Now, Dr. Kerr had sent me a draft of that chapter well before it was published. And then, of course, he wanted to know what I thought. So I had to tell him that I didn't agree with him at all. So I told him, Dr. Kerr, don't you think that if we are facing a crisis, that means that we need vision more than ever before? Well, I know what you mean, and it's interesting that you should say that, because a group of young faculty members from Berkeley just told me the same thing. They reacted the same way you are reacting, but it's not in the cards, he said. The hedgehogs are not coming back, and this is a time for foxes. And he didn't change it, and that's the way it was published. And I was so impacted by this friendly disagreement that I couldn't stop thinking about it. So eventually I decided to create a couple of courses on higher education, basically on leadership, on academic leadership. This is how I got into this field, by the way. So that I would be able, in these courses, to think about this a little more. And then that wasn't enough, so then I decided I had to write this book. So this is why I wrote this book. Now, in this book, I use this animal metaphor many times in different ways, as I said before. For example, the most obvious way. When I look at the most important presidents of the University of California, I do say whether they were foxes or hedgehogs, and then analyze what they did and their accomplishments from that perspective. So that's the most obvious way. I want to say, though, that this is not a simplistic thing. For example, I don't say foxes are bad, hedgehogs are good, out with the foxes, in with the hedgehogs. I don't say that at all. On the contrary, I say that we need them both. And in fact, administrators, to be good, need to have both sides. Each administrator should have a combination of these two characteristics. So we are just talking about the matter of, are you predominantly a hedgehog and predominantly a fox? Dr. Kerr himself, who was a big hedgehog, had a very considerable fox side to his personality. He was a very good negotiator. Remember, he was an arbitrator. And this is how he was able to negotiate the master plan. So everybody should have both sides, but it's just a matter of do we have people who are predominantly hedgehogs or foxes. And what I say is that at this point we have people who are mostly foxes, and that we need more variety. I also spent some time talking about the issue of vision. What these leaders see? What do they see? When I say that hedgehogs are visionary, I don't mean to imply that foxes are blind, because in fact foxes can see very well. They just see different things. Hedgehogs have this long and narrow vision. They can see way into the future, and by the way, they also can see way into the past, and they like history. And that is, in fact, how then they think about the future, by looking back and then projecting. And this is Dr. Kirsch's words, by definition, they have blinders, because they are so focused on that long and narrow line going into the future that they can miss things that are around them. And he missed a few things. Foxes are the opposite. So foxes have very good peripheral vision. They can see everything that is around them very, very well. But they cannot see far ahead. So it's harder for them to plan. They also don't have much interest in history. They are not interested in looking back. So they are interested in geography, not in history. They are interested in the terrain, looking to see where the traps are, how they can maybe move and grab some money here or something else there. So it's a different kind of talent. And we need both kinds of talent. So this is what I say in the book. We need these two things. And at present, in fact, we have mostly foxes. So there is a lack of balance. I also use this metaphor in a different way in the book. I use the expression hedgehog concept, the hedgehog concept. And another expression I use is fox culture. Now, the hedgehog concept is not my term. This comes from Jim Collins. Jim Collins is a very famous person in the field of business. He has published a number of books. They are all bestsellers. He's a business guru. And what he says in those books is actually very simple. He says, when you look at the business companies that succeeded, what you discover is that they had a number of characteristics. For example, they have very good leadership. They had what he calls a culture of discipline. They had a focus on quality. And they went through a long period of build-up, he says, before they could articulate this hedgehog concept, which is the vision, and what was unique and different about them. Once that is articulated, everybody realizes that that is the vision, and then they simply are faithful to the vision. And that is a successful company. The companies that did not succeed, he found that either they never developed a hedgehog concept, or they had one, but then went astray and forgot it and weren't faithful to it. So I use this term, the hedgehog concept, to talk about the vision that is unique to the University of California and how this vision was established, and I'm going to talk about this later. I also talk about fox culture, and this is my own term, I just made it up. And it's a very simple thing. It refers to this culture that we are part of now, which is very focused on short-term goals. It's basically a free-for-all culture, a culture in which people don't think about the long-term consequences of their actions. And what I say is that we need to break away from this fox culture. We need to focus on the hedgehog concept, update it if necessary, which I think is necessary, and then make sure to be faithful to it. Okay? So that's what I do. With that, I think I can move to the more historical part, and I want to make a very brief review of the most important leaders and what they did. But the first thing I want to say is that I have found that when you study institutions, it's very important to go back to the beginning and to understand the circumstances of the creation of that particular institution. And in the case of the University of California, what we had at the beginning was a private college, the College of California, which was run by scholars from Yale University. So these were Ivy League scholars. And that college was very much in the spirit of the Ivy League. Then the state decided to give them public funds and then transform that institution into the University of California. But the leaders of the College of California, when they were negotiating with the state, insisted that the new institution had to be a complete university. They said that it shouldn't be a vocational school, because there was a big trend towards doing agriculture or mechanical arts and all these things. And they insisted that the university should retain this spirit. And this is the Ivy League spirit. And the university has retained that to the present time. So something that is so much part of our personality was there from the start. Now, going to the presidents that I find the most consequential. The first one, of course, was Henry Durant, who was the president of the College of California and then the president of the University of California. And he's the person who insisted on the idea of a complete university. He was clearly a hedgehog. He had a clear idea what the university should be like. And I think he had an impact. The second consequential president is, of course, Gilman. This is the famous Gilman, the most famous academic leader of his time. And Gilman, of course, was a tremendous hedgehog, and one who had the same vision from the start. Gilman wanted to create a research university in the United States. Remember, the United States did not have research universities at all. You couldn't even get a PhD in the United States. So he wanted to do this. And first he tried at Yale University, where he was. And he had some partial success, but not a whole lot of success. Then he had the opportunity to come to California, and he was here for 3 years. And he actually did a great deal in those 3 years. He actually got UC started on the path, put us on the right track to become a research university. But he had a lot of problems, political problems. A lot of people didn't like his approach, and it was nasty. It was nasty. And then he had an opportunity to go back east and took it. And of course, that is when he was given all this money and all this freedom to create the institution of his dreams, Johns Hopkins, which is supposed to be the first research university in America. But let's not forget that before he went to Johns Hopkins, he was here for 3 years, and he really had quite an impact on the development of the institution. So I think he was an important president. Now, the next important president is someone nobody talks about these days, and it's a fox. President Kellogg. President Kellogg was president during the last decade of the 19th century. And from everything I have been able to read about him, he was a very good fox, very smooth, had a very good relationship with the regents. In fact, he made them feel so comfortable with him that they started to delegate tasks. And remember, the regents had a lot of power. They had all the power practically. They made decisions down to the last budget item. I mean, they really were running the university on a daily basis. So they started to delegate and give him more and more power. This turned out to be very important because when the next president comes on board, and that is of course Wheeler, a big hedgehog, he's able to do a lot because all of a sudden, you know, the office of the president is much more powerful than it used to be. And Wheeler is of course the person who finally transforms the University of California into a research university, and a very good one. So during that period, Berkeley, of course, UC was Berkeley and Berkeley was UC at that point. Berkeley became very important, founding member of the AAU, up there with Harvard, Stanford, Michigan, etc. And that was Wheeler. Wheeler did it. He was very creative, very energetic, very interesting person. Now, the next consequential president, in my opinion, is Sproul, and that's another fox. Sproul was clearly a fox. He was president for almost 30 years. And I will say, to use Collins' terminology, that Sproul presided over that period of build-up that precedes the articulation of the hedgehog concept. So the university was growing, was getting more stable and better, and so by the time Kerr comes on board as president, Kerr of course is the big hedgehog, the institution is ready for this hedgehog concept. Just to give you an idea about Sproul, Sproul was a character. He was the biggest micromanager you can imagine. For example, when Dr. Kerr was chancellor at Berkeley, if he took a taxi from the airport back home or back to the campus, the next morning he had to send a receipt with a cover letter explaining why it was necessary to take a taxi as opposed to other cheaper means of transportation to President Sproul. So he was involved in approving taxi fares, I mean everything. So Kerr was chancellor at Berkeley, but he didn't have any power because Sproul was doing everything. So Kerr started to do a lot of strategic planning. Okay, academic planning, enrollment planning, all kinds of planning. And Sproul thought that was okay. That was a harmless exercise that would keep Kerr occupied and off his hair. Now, Kerr got very good at planning during those years. And then when Kerr becomes president of the UC system, he simply continued with the planning. Only that now we are talking about the entire system and, in fact, the entire state through the master plan for higher education. So you see how Sproul made that possible indirectly. And this is the moment when we get this hedgehog concept. The master plan is the big vision, what's different and unique about the University of California. You know a lot about the master plan. I will not say very much, except to remind you that it made a promise to the state that anybody and everybody who wanted to go to college could find a place in the system, either at the community colleges, CSU, or UC. That was quite revolutionary at the time. It also had a division of labor. It assigned different tasks to each system, and also had specifics about how many students each was going to take. UC, as you know, is 12.5%, etc. Now, this is very important because I think by assigning certain roles, and in the case of UC it was the role of research and doctoral education, what the master plan did was to put a wall around UC and say everything inside this wall will be research university, quality, and all these institutions will be very high quality. And that is what I think is the vision, is what I call systemic excellence, not just excellence. There are many excellent universities, look at Harvard and Stanford and so forth. This is systemic excellence, the idea that you have a whole system in which all campuses aspire to this very high level of quality. And look at the way we talk about the campuses. I have heard many people talk about the more mature campuses, the less mature campuses. Mercedes the baby. Why? Because it is understood that in the fullness of time, all our campuses will reach this very high standard of quality. We have the same faculty tenure, promotion, and merit standards in the entire UC system, and they are very demanding standards. And we have periodic evaluations, and that has kept the faculty very productive. We have the same admission standards, in fact, for students, because everybody has to be UC eligible, which is a high standard. We have a lot of coordination in the system, and we also speak with one voice, and that is the voice of the president. The chancellors cannot go to Sacramento and ask for money or things like that. It has to be the president. So this was the vision. This is what Collins calls the breakthrough, the idea of systemic excellence, and Dr. Kerr did that. So in that sense, I think he's the most important president because he's the one who articulated the vision that has made us so famous. After Kerr, we got a number of presidents. One in particular, I think, was very successful and had a lot of positive impact, and that is David Gardner, who was and is still alive, a very good fox. Now I want to say something about David Gardner. He has been a real sport. Most people don't like to be called foxes. Okay? Being a fox is considered less cool than being a hedgehog. So he read 3 drafts of my book, 3, and made detailed comments about each of those 3 drafts. And he was a sport, was very gracious. I'm sure he wasn't crazy about being called a fox, but he took it very well. So I want to say that. So Gardner was very successful, and he did some very interesting things. The most amazing thing he did was to get a 32% increase to the university budget during his first year in office. 32%, just like that, first year. With that, he was able to fix all the problems that have been created by the previous 16 years of budget cuts, and go beyond that and improve the university. He also did a lot of fundraising, so there was a lot of money coming into the system, and he was very keen on using the money well, using the money to enhance quality. Other interesting things that he did, he was very good with diversity, the most proactive president in the entire history of the University of California when it comes to diversity is David Gardner. And he was also very interested in international affairs and travel all over the world. So I think the Gardner presidency is this golden moment. By then, the master plan has been in place for a while, so it's producing results, you know. And there's all this new money coming in, and Gardner is traveling all over the world, and that's when UC became super, super famous everywhere. And in fact, he says when he went to other countries, he was received with honors of a head of state. So that was this moment of glory. Okay. After Gardner, we got more foxes, some of them better than others. And much also depended on the economy. For instance, Atkinson did pretty well, but he had a good economy. Dines had horrendous problems, but he also had a very bad economy. In my book, I spent a lot of time talking about the Dines presidency, which I think was almost tragic in a sense. I actually liked Dines, and I was sorry to see that he had so much trouble. At the beginning, he seemed to be looking for a vision. He was looking for a vision, and I thought this vision might be a vision of diversity and inclusiveness and more access and all that. But very soon after he started, he was derailed by all kinds of problems and scandals. In my book, I talk about what I call fox fatigue. This was a period of intense Fox fatigue, not just at UC or in California, but in the entire country. There was the Bush presidency, 2 wars going on, the economy clearly already going badly, and everybody getting very nervous and very unhappy, and focusing on UC and finding things to criticize at UC. I spent a lot of time in my book talking about the attacks that took place, attacks on women and minority administrators during that period, and they were very bad attacks. And of course, this is nothing new. I mean, we know that every time there is a crisis, some minority group of some kind is going to be attacked. So in this case, it was women and minority administrators who suffered these terrible attacks. He was not sophisticated enough, I think, to understand what was happening, or clever enough to deal with it. He was not a good fox. He was not a good fox, actually. He was trying to be a hedgehog, but he couldn't, and he was not a good fox. So things didn't go well. And in the end, he was removed from office, as you might remember. And then we got President Yudof, and that's where my narrative ends, at the beginning of the Yudof presidency. And we'll have to wait to see what he does and so forth to be able to evaluate it. So in the book, I talk about how at present we have way too many folks, not just the presidents, but the administrative teams, the senior management teams are overwhelmingly populated by hedgehogs. And we need a little more diversity at the top. And so I talk a lot about succession planning. In the book I have a whole chapter about that. In fact, I think we need to begin to tap the talent of the faculty. We have a very talented faculty. We need to begin to identify, mentor, and promote creative faculty who could become administrators. And we need to make an effort to diversify those senior management teams in every respect, not just hedgehogs and foxes, also more women, more minorities, but also, and I think this is very important, more disciplinary variety. Because if you look at who can become an administrator today, they are all scientists and engineers. And if you look at those senior management teams, they have very few humanists, very few social scientists, very few people from places like education. There is a complete lack of balance. So I think that those senior management teams need to be more diverse in every respect. So I spend a lot of time in my book talking about this. Today I want to say something a little different, and it is about the faculty. The faculty are what people call non-positional leaders. By that I mean they don't have positions of authority, they don't have administrative positions, but they should be leaders, right? They should be non-positional leaders. And they should, in my opinion, take more initiative and lead at this point in time. So that's what I'd like to see. I like the faculty to take the role of the hedgehog and help the administration, given that we have so many foxes in the administration. And we need foxes. I'm not saying that we don't need them, okay? But we also need this vision, and maybe the faculty could help the administration by providing some of this vision. The way I see the university right now is like a small boat in the middle of this big ocean, and it's a rough ocean with very big waves, and it's very dangerous. And the administration is working very hard trying to prevent the boat from sinking. So there's water in the boat, they get it out, and they go out there to get money so that we don't have to close. So they are trying to keep the boat afloat. But there are more people in the boat, and we have the students in the boat. And the students are getting splashed by the waves and getting dizzy with all this, and they see these ugly looking rocks right ahead. And they are yelling and screaming, saying, "We are all going to die. This is, this is a mistake. We are not headed in the right direction." And they are right. Everybody's right. But the faculty are also in the boat. And the faculty cannot just sit there and witness all these things. everybody's right. The administration is absolutely right that they are keeping us afloat. They are. And the students are right that we need to do more than that, because otherwise we are about to crash. And so maybe the faculty who has more time and peace of mind could take the role of the hedgehog and begin to look ahead and see where we might want to take this boat. So I would like to see the faculty more engaged. Now, I don't have to tell you that this is a difficult moment in the history of the University of California, and in fact in the history of the entire country. According to Kerr, higher education cannot escape history. This is actually the title of one of his books, Higher Education Cannot Escape History. And he was right. I mean, the university cannot escape history. We are part of history. We are affected by history. But here is the thing, can we go beyond that? Can we actually make history? Right now we are just coping. We are coping. Can we lead? And I have to believe that we can. I have to believe that we can do this. I believe that the university should be an uplifting principle in society. And this is not my idea, this comes from the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset, who was a very important source, by the way, for Kerr's thinking. And in fact, Kerr published an introduction to an English translation of Ortega's book. So, an uplifting principle in society, I think we should definitely try to do that. Now, in the handout, you have a few things there. What are the forces of history that you see cannot escape? I think there are some things that are clearly happening all over the world. Globalization and privatization, that is everywhere. Privatization is not just here, it's in Europe, it's in Asia, it's everywhere. Globalization, same thing. So there are certain forces of history that are a reality, and we have to face them. Now, that does not mean that we have to privatize everything, globalize everything, but we have to be mindful of those realities. The other thing is, how can UC make history? I think we can make history by advancing a new vision of access that takes all these forces into consideration. But first we need the vision to deal with the forces. Because once we have the vision in place, then we can say, yeah, it's okay to privatize this, but not that. But without that, we don't have any criteria, and it's just massive privatization with no plan. The other way is by insisting on proper public funding for the university. And I want to say that I have been a little disturbed by some of the comments that our leaders have been making in recent times, in the fall in particular. It must have been a talking point because everybody was repeating this. Yudov and the others saying things like, well, the state has, it's clear that the state is an unreliable partner. The state is just an unreliable partner. Therefore, we should look for money elsewhere. Or declarations like the good old times are not coming back, and we better become entrepreneurial, we better do this and that. Well, I don't think we can let the state off the hook just like that. So, yes, there are many things that we can and should do, but what we shouldn't do is just give up on the state. On the contrary, we have to go there with the vision and say, we expect you to be reliable, and we expect you to provide appropriate funding for this. One of the good things about the recent student protests, in my opinion, is that they have reminded us that we have to do this, that we have to be more aggressive, that we really have to fight. We cannot just cave and say, okay, we privatize everything, we do fundraising, and that's that. We have to demand proper funding for the vision. The other thing is what to do about the master plan. I think the master plan was a very good thing. I don't think it was perfect, and I have been saying this for years now. There are some problems, particularly with respect to diversity. Remember, the master plan is from 1960, And today, California is much more diverse than it was in 1960. So there has been a fair amount of segregation along the color line. If you look at UC, it's whiter than CSU, CSU is whiter than the community college. So we need to think about these issues and figure out how to address them. And we also need perhaps to increase the number of people who come to UC. But the master plan should not be abandoned. On the contrary, I think it's more relevant than ever. And so it's worth fighting for. It is worth fighting for the hedgehog concept of systemic excellence. I don't see any indication that this is passé. This is not passé. This is completely current. And I think it's very important also to keep the commitment to educate a certain percentage of the state's population, which I think, and what I put in my book is that this should be more than 12.5, probably 15 will be more like it. But the idea of a specific commitment, because I fear that some people are beginning to sound like, well, we are not getting a lot of money, so we'll educate however many students we can educate with the little money we are getting, and then we'll get paying customers and do other things. I think that would be a mistake. So we have to keep the promise, we have to update the promise, if anything, and be more aggressive. So I think these are things that are worth fighting for. So what can faculty members do at this time of crisis, and how can they complement the work of administrators? As I said before, I think they can take the role of the hedgehog and lead. They can set the course of the boat. Administrators are working very hard at dealing with what is. Faculty members must work even harder at articulating what should be. Now, this is not going to be easy. But there is an old dictum that goes like this: it is not necessary to hope in order to undertake, nor to succeed in order to persevere. This comes from the Middle Ages, and it's quite something. It is not necessary to hope in order to undertake, nor to succeed in order to persevere. I believe that we must undertake and we must persevere. Better to try and fail 1,000 times than not to try at all. Thank you very much. So, question.
Questions?
Yes.
Do you think that the 2020 plan is a hedgehog move or a fox move?
Well, I haven't been following things too closely in the last few months. For one thing, I couldn't read very much, so I cannot say very much about the 2020 plan. And I think I will refrain from going around classifying specific things that are happening today. I would prefer to wait until we have a little more historical perspective. For instance, President Yudof presidency. I don't say anything about him in the book, and I don't plan to say very much about him, but when he steps down, I'll probably write an article, but then I have to do research and think about it. But it's hard, I don't think it's a wise idea to go around saying this is fox or hedgehog right now.
Okay.
But I'm pleased to see that there is planning, I'll tell you that. Very pleased. Yes?
As someone who's working on the 2020 initiative and on the planning, I'm interested in your observation that we need to sustain the request to the state for adequate public funding. And I guess I'd just be interested in your observations or comments about sort of the larger political context that request is occurring in. I mean, obviously we have budgetary problems sort of at all levels of government. But at the same time, it feels like we have, to use your parlance, a more fox-like approach in our national politics, and maybe even globally as well as we're confronting this. And it seems like we're moving the opposite direction in terms of an agreed vision upon the value of public goods in general and education in particular. And so while I would like to think that our leaders at the university level are doing all they can to press the case in Sacramento and elsewhere for more public resources, it seems like we're fighting that battle alongside of many other aspects of society. And
Well, you know, every movement always has a counter movement. And there is no question that we are in the middle of a very foxy period. But I think what you are seeing with all the protests, not just the students, but other people, is basically a statement about dissatisfaction with this Fox culture and a desire for vision and a desire for fairness and for access. I mean, we are hearing a lot of voices now saying these things, and that should help us. That should help us. This is why I think the student protest is a very good thing, because it's going to make us focus on things and maybe not to give up so quickly. Put a fight, but we have to have a vision to have this fight. So I'm not as pessimistic as other people. You know what I have been wondering about? If Dr. Kerr came back to life now, what would he think? Because when he said these things about the foxes and the hedgehogs, that was like in the thick of fox culture, right? And before people really started to rebel against it. So at that point, it looked to him like this is fox culture forever. But after that, you know, so many things have happened that I have often thought, what will he think now? He probably maybe changed his mind about this article or this chapter. But at that point, it looked like foxes forever. Oh my God. So things change. And I'll tell you something else, that when things change, they change very quickly. And I'm from Spain originally, and it's a country that has undergone tremendous changes. And so you can feel like nothing is ever going to change, nothing is going to ever to change, and then it does change. So I think eventually, if we do all the right things, we lead and we advocate and we do these things, we might prevail it. Because many people are tired of this fox culture everywhere. So that is a good development. Oh yes.
I wonder if you could say even a bit more about the rise of the fox. So it's one thing if foxes breed foxes, that suggests a certain kind of solution. It's another thing if the climate has changed in such a way that hedgehogs no longer thrive in this habitat. What do you think accounts for the recent changes?
Yeah. Well, at this point, hedgehogs don't thrive at all. And you know, if Dr. Kerr came back to life today and applied for his old job as Chancellor of Berkeley or President of the UC system, he would not get those jobs. And he knew that. So this is not a good moment for hedgehogs. Now, how did we get into this situation, having all these foxes and so forth? I think you have to go back to the 80s, the Reagan presidency. Even before there were some signs of this, but the Reagan presidency is when this becomes more clear. And there was a fundamental change in American society about the issue of fairness, also the gap between rich and poor and all. So that's when all that started. And this is also when universities started to be more entrepreneurial and they started to appreciate corporate qualities more. And so they started to get these presidents like Gardner. Gardner was a very corporate type. Because when you need to get money, then you need people who can get the money. And guess what? People who are good at getting money are mostly foxes, right? So we moved to a more corporate environment and an environment of less fairness overall in society and also at the university. So people begin to say, we need someone to do fundraising, we need these people. And it's true that that's what foxes do particularly well. They do fundraising. So that took us there. And then before you know it, all of a sudden we are looking at a different model of administrator that becomes the new model. So even for positions that might not have so much fundraising associated with them, people are looking for that kind of person. So there was a change. Tim is alive. There was a change. It was gradual. But I would say the first corporate president was David Garner. He clearly was different. And David Garner, in fact, I'll tell you how he got the money. He got the money by going to Sacramento and telling the governor and all the other people there, I'm a business person. I understand you guys. I understand how business is done. And you know, if you give me money and do these things, and he promised various things that the university was going to do, that's also the beginning of accountability. This trend, I don't particularly care for accountability, but that's what foxes do to justify, you know, we get things, but we give you this and we'll give you that. And so that it appears to be a trade. So Garner is the first corporate president of the University of California. And in fact, the first one also to be heavily criticized, and he made a lot of enemies. So you can see some of the fox fatigue in the system there from the very beginning. When you have the first important fox, that's also when you have the first attacks on Fox Koch. He was very much criticized. People said he was a Mormon, he's a Mormon. People said Mormon greed. He's greedy. It's one of the stereotypes about Mormons, apparently. I mean, he was really attacked in nasty ways. So he's the first corporate president. That's the Reagan era. He was also associated with Reagan politically. And from that point on, we begin to look for that kind of leader. And then, of course, leaders like to hire people like themselves. So then they get teams who are more or less like themselves. So then you gradually move to a different model. You don't get the Kirsch anymore. The Kirsch might even be inconvenient because they have visions that, you know, people might not want to follow, and then what do you do with that? So it took some time, but I would say when you look back at the presidents, there is a very big difference between Garner and his predecessors. And talking to old faculty members, very old faculty members, who are still alive, but you know, they are really old, they remember that change in private conversations, saying that they will go to the president's house to parties, and all of a sudden the parties were not the same parties. They were much more elegant and elaborate, and all these rich people, and they will talk to one another and say, wow, this is not the same university. So it's the Garner presidency.
Jack Peltison succeeded David Gardner,
yes,
and his appointment was an attempt to reestablish the more academic hedgehog kind of values in the presidency.
Yes.
Was that successful in your view?
Well, Peltison had a terrible time. He didn't want the job to begin with, and so he did it against his better judgment for 3 years. It was a very difficult moment with a budget crisis, very bad budget crisis, and also with the entire 209, Proposition 209 movement. And he tried to just defend the university by saying things like, well, look, we are very good, look at our quality, things that people didn't care about. So he didn't put a very strong defense. Carl Pister, remember Carl Pister, in one of an interview, I can't remember where, he said something to the effect that Peterson didn't fight hard enough or well enough, and he said, I cannot imagine David Gardner or Dick Atkinson handling the Proposition 209 thing that way. They will have been much stronger, and Gardner in particular. So most people that thinks about that period, I think, I would say people believe that he wasn't that good. And he was a very nice person. Everybody says that he was a lovely person. Following the Gardner, there were some scandals about Gardner's retirement and all kinds of things. So Peterson actually gave up a lot of his compensation. I mean, a lot of his salary. He just said, I won't take it. It was a very considerable percentage of his income that he actually gave away to the students as a student fellowship, I think. So everybody says he was a wonderful person, very well-meaning, but the thing was just, it was too much for him. And he was not good at that kind of fight. And he had, his enemies were very effective. So he wasn't up to the kind of fight, I don't think. So it was a very rough period. I often had wondered if Gardner had been the president still, if 209 would have prospered. I think Gardner would have fought that tooth and nail. But Peterson either didn't want to or didn't know how to do it. And that's what Pipster was saying. I cannot imagine David Gardner putting up with this. He would not have tolerated this. So I think the agreement is that he was a lovely person, very honorable, but he didn't have a lot of the qualities that were necessary at that point, and you had to fight very hard because it was a very nasty moment. And you also needed a vision, because you have to fight a vision with a vision. And there was a vision out there which was phrased like, shouldn't we eliminate preferential treatment? Preferential treatment would be affirmative action. Of course, preferential treatment sounds very un-American, right? So there was this vision that was support behind 209, and he didn't have a vision to counter that. So he was just saying things like, well, we are a good university and we know our business, but he wasn't able to come up with a vision to defend the point of view of the university. So, difficult moment. I don't envy poor Peterson. Very, very difficult moment.
Other questions or comments? If not, I suggest we adjourn our discussion to where coffee and cookies await. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.